42 years. That is how long the family of Deborah Lynn Myers waited for someone to look them in the eye and say her name out loud in a courtroom. She was 23 years old. She drove a rust-flecked '74 Chevrolet Chevette she'd named Birdie and worked the early shift at the Harlan County Textile Mill, the same mill her mother had worked before her, the same shift, the same narrow road home. On the morning of September 9, 1980, she left that mill at 7:45, waved goodbye to her co-worker Connie Mullins through the chain-link fence, and was never seen alive again. That is not a story about a woman who simply disappeared. That is a story about a man who had been hiding in plain sight inside a community that trusted him completely. A man who sat at picnics and church suppers and county board meetings for 4 decades, while Deborah Lynn Myers' mother drove that same narrow road home every morning and wondered. It would take 42 years, 3 retired detectives, and a single partial fingerprint lifted from a steering wheel in 1980 finally finding its match in a genealogical database that didn't exist when Deborah Lynn was alive, to expose him. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to Harlan County, Kentucky, in the late summer of 1980. Because to understand what was taken, you first have to understand who Deborah Lynn Myers was. Harlan County sits in the southeastern corner of Kentucky, deep in the Cumberland Mountains, tucked into a landscape of coal country and creek hollows and roads that curl around hillsides like the county itself is trying to keep its secrets folded in. In September of 1980, Ronald Reagan's face was on every TV set at the Harlan Diner, and people were talking about the hostages in Iran and the price of a gallon of gas. And in the hills above town, autumn came early, the maples turning red before the first week of September was even finished. Deborah Lynn Myers had grown up 6 miles outside of Harlan proper, in a community of modest clapboard houses where neighbors still left their car windows down at night without a second thought. Her father, Kenneth, had worked the mines until his lungs gave out. Her mother, Ruth, kept the home and worked the textile mill and made enough that Deborah didn't have to leave for the city the way so many young people did in those years. Deborah had considered it. She'd had the application to the nursing program at Eastern Kentucky University sitting on her kitchen table for 2 months, a plain manila folder she kept meaning to fill out. She wanted to be a pediatric nurse. She had told her younger sister Carol that she wanted to work with children, that there wasn't anything that made her feel more useful than taking care of somebody who couldn't take care of themselves. She was known in Harlan for 2 things: the casseroles she brought to every church potluck without being asked, and her laugh, a wide, startled sound, like she was always a little surprised that something had turned out to be funny. Her co-worker Connie Mullins would describe that laugh in an interview with the Harlan Daily Enterprise years later. "You'd hear it before you saw her coming," she said. It was the kind of laugh that made you want to know what the joke was. Deborah lived alone in a rented house on Clover Fork Road. She kept a small vegetable garden in the side yard. She had a gray cat named Buttons who waited on the porch every morning she left for work. She called her mother Ruth every Sunday evening without fail, from the payphone at the Harlan Food King if she had to, because she didn't believe in missing that call. She was not a woman who vanished into the margins. She was the center of things, and that is why when the mill shift ended on September 9, 1980, and Deborah Lynn Myers did not come home, Ruth Myers knew within the hour that something had gone terribly wrong. That Sunday phone call never came. The last confirmed sighting of Deborah Lynn Myers was at 7:47 in the morning, September 9, 1980, on the access road running along the eastern fence line of the Harlan County Tri-State Textile Mill. Connie Mullins saw her climb into the Chevette, turn it over twice. It had a stubborn starter, and pull out onto Route 38, heading south toward Clover Fork Road. Connie waited 2 minutes in the parking lot talking to another coworker. She did not see the Chevette again. By 9:15 that morning, Deborah Lynn's gray cat Buttons was still sitting on the porch. The screen door to the house was locked. The curtains were drawn. Deborah's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Hester Arnett, noticed Buttons still waiting when she went out for her mail. She thought nothing of it. By noon, Connie Mullins had a feeling she couldn't shake. She drove past Clover Fork Road on her lunch break. The Chevette wasn't in the driveway. By 6 that evening, Ruth Myers had not heard from her daughter. She called the house. No answer. She called Connie. Connie told her about that morning, and Ruth hung up the phone and got in her car. The Harlan County Sheriff's Office logged the missing persons report at 8:41 p.m. On September 9, 1980, they found the Chevette 2 days later. It was parked on a gravel turnout off Route 38, just under a mile from the textile mill access road, half hidden by a stand of Virginia pines. The driver's door was unlocked. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her keys were still in the ignition. The engine was cold. There was no sign of struggle inside the car. No blood. Nothing overturned. But on the driver's side door panel, lifted by a deputy with a fingerprint kit and recorded in the case file, was a single clear partial print on the interior handle. It did not match Deborah Lynn Myers. It belonged to someone who had been inside that car. Someone who had reached across and pulled that door closed from the inside. The print was lifted, logged, filed. It would sit untouched for 42 years. Deborah Lynn Myers was never found. Deputy Sheriff Gerald Combs was 31 years old in September of 1980, and the Myers case was the first missing persons investigation of his career that did not resolve in the first 72 hours. He would say later, in a recorded interview with the Harlan County Historical Society made shortly before his retirement, that he knew from the Chevette that this was not a woman who had left voluntarily. The purse, he said. Women don't leave their purses. In the first week, Combs canvassed every household within 2 miles of the Route 38 turnout. He interviewed 43 people. He identified 2 persons of interest: a seasonal farmhand who had been let go from a property near the mill access road 2 weeks before Deborah disappeared, and a former boyfriend named Dale Etter, who had reportedly shown up uninvited at Deborah's house twice in the summer of 1980. Both men were interviewed. Both provided alibis that were checked and held. Etter, in particular, was corroborated by 4 separate witnesses who placed him at a livestock auction in Bell County on the morning of September 9th. Deborah's car was processed a second time. Dogs were brought in. Searches ran through the pine stands along Route 38, through the creek bottoms, along the ridge lines. Nothing. In October of 1980, the Kentucky State Police assigned a detective from the Harlan Post to assist. His name was Raymond Fugate. He was methodical, careful, and known for closing cases. He opened Deborah Lynn Myers' file, and he didn't close it until 1986, when a supervisor told him the active resources had to move on. Fugate told colleagues he had never felt right about that decision. The partial fingerprint on the door panel was sent to the FBI in 1981. The AFIS system, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, was not yet operational. The print sat in a physical evidence file. There were no matches in any database that existed at the time. Ruth Myers kept calling. Every year, on September 9th, she called the Harlan County Sheriff's Office. Every year, someone told her there was nothing new to report. She never raised her voice. She never accused anyone of anything. She just asked, quietly, if anyone was still looking. The answer, by the mid-1980s, was no. By 1990, 10 years had passed since Deborah Lynn Myers drove out of that mill parking lot and never arrived home. The rented house on Clover Fork Road had changed hands twice. The vegetable garden was gone. Buttons the cat had died in 1983, at the age of 12, on Ruth Myers's front porch, where he had gone to live after September of 1980, when there was nowhere else for him to go. Ruth Myers still drove Route 38 sometimes, not every day. But on certain mornings, early September mornings, when the maples were just beginning to think about turning, she drove it slowly. The way you drive a road you know carries something you haven't found yet. Her younger daughter Carol, who was 16 when Deborah disappeared, grew up and moved to Lexington and became a teacher. She named her first daughter Deborah. She came home every September. She and her mother sat at Ruth's kitchen table on the anniversary, drank coffee out of the same white ceramic mugs Ruth had owned for 20 years, and talked about the things Deborah had wanted to do. The nursing program. The children she would have helped. The casseroles. The laugh. In 1995, a new cold case unit was formed within the Kentucky State Police. Gerald Combs, by then a sergeant, requested that the Myers case be added to their review list. It was added. A detective named Sandra Pruitt reviewed the file in 1997. She noted the partial fingerprint. She noted that AFIS had been operational since 1989 and the print had never been entered. She had it entered. No match. The case went cold again. In 2003, a documentary filmmaker passing through Harlan County heard about the case from a bartender at a roadside tavern. He filmed an interview with Ruth Myers, who was 71 years old by then, still clear-eyed and straight-backed, still driving Route 38. The film was never released. The filmmaker moved on. The tape sat in a production company's storage unit in Nashville. The reward poster in the window of the Harlan Food King had faded to nearly nothing. But the manager, who had been a sophomore in high school in 1980 and had known Deborah by sight from Sunday services, kept it there. He never took it down. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, tracking down records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want this channel to keep bringing you stories like Deborah Lynn Myers's, cases the world almost forgot, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let's get back to Deborah. The case had been cold for 38 years when an investigator named T.J. Markham got a phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March of 2018. T.J. Markham was 47 years old, the lead investigator of the Kentucky State Police Cold Case Unit out of Frankfort, and he had 3 open files on his desk when his phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a genealogical researcher named Patricia Hollis, working out of a lab contracted by the state's Cold Case Unit to process outstanding biological evidence. Markham would later describe the call in court documents as the most matter-of-fact bombshell he'd ever received. "She told me," he said in a 2022 press conference, "that there had been a development with a partial print submitted for genealogical cross-referencing, and that I might want to come in." He went in that afternoon. He sat across from Patricia Hollis in a lab that smelled like clean plastic and cold air, and she explained what had happened. In 2016, the Kentucky State Police Cold Case Unit had begun working with a private forensic genealogy firm to run biological evidence through a process that had not existed when Deborah Myers disappeared. The process works like this: latent fingerprint ridge detail and any recoverable biological material are cross-referenced against consumer genealogy databases, the same ancestry websites where ordinary people search for their family trees, to identify possible relatives of an unknown contributor. Those relatives, traced carefully through their family lines, can lead investigators back to a single individual the databases had never directly cataloged. The partial print from the Chevette door panel had been entered into this process in 2017. Patricia Hollis had just received a hit. The hit pointed to a family line with a traceable branch in Harlan County, Kentucky. A branch that narrowed through 3 cross-referenced lineages to a single man who had lived his entire life within 12 miles of the Route 38 turnout where Deborah Lynn Myers' car had been found. His name was Carl Eugene Stedham. He was 74 years old. He had lived in Harlan County his entire life. He had worked for many years as a mechanic at a service station on Route 38, a station less than a quarter mile from where the Chevette had been found. He had attended the same church as the Myers family for 14 years. He had served on the Harlan County Agricultural Board in the 1990s. He had a wife. He had children. He had grandchildren who went to the same schools Deborah Myers had attended 20 years before them. T.J. Markham drove back to his office and pulled the original 1980 case file. Carl Eugene Stidham's name was not in it. He had never been identified as a person of interest, never interviewed, never eliminated. He had been invisible, hidden in plain sight for 42 years. Building a case meant moving carefully. Markham knew that one genealogical cross-reference, however promising, was not a conviction. He needed a physical DNA sample to confirm the fingerprint match and establish Stidham's presence inside that car. Working with the Harlan County Sheriff's Office, Markham's team placed Stidham under discreet observation for 11 days. On April 3, 2018, Stidham left a half-finished cup of coffee on a table at a Harlan diner. A detective retrieved it. The DNA recovered from that cup matched the biological material recovered from the Chevette interior in 1980. Not a partial match. Not a probable match. Records show the laboratory confirmation returned a match probability exceeding 1 in 300 billion. On April 14, 2018, T.J. Markham called Carol Deborah's sister in Lexington. He asked if she could come to Harlan. She came. She sat in a conference room at the Harlan County Sheriff's Office with her mother, Ruth Myers, who was 86 years old. Still straight-backed, still clear-eyed. And T.J. Markham told them that they had identified the man responsible for what had happened to Deborah Lynn. Ruth Myers did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Does he know you're coming?" "Not yet," Markham said. "Good," she said. And she folded her hands on the table. On the morning of April 17, 2018, law enforcement vehicles pulled onto a rural property on Ridgeway Branch Road in Harlan County. Carl Eugene Stidham came to the door in his work clothes. He looked at the people standing in his yard, and he understood immediately what they were. He said nothing. He offered no resistance. According to court documents, he turned around, walked back inside, sat down at his kitchen table, and put his head in his hands. He was placed under arrest at 8:53 in the morning. Officers noted that his wife, who came out of the back bedroom when she heard voices, stood in the doorway and stared at the handcuffs on her husband of 43 years and did not speak. The community of Harlan County found out through a press release issued that afternoon. The Harlan Daily Enterprise ran it on the front page the following morning. Within hours, people who had known Carl Eugene Stidham for decades, his neighbors, his former customers at the service station, the families of children who had gone to school with his grandchildren, had to sit with the knowledge that the man who killed Deborah Lynn Myers had been at county picnics and church suppers and school fundraisers for 4 decades. The reaction, in the words of one longtime Harlan County resident interviewed for a local news broadcast, was simple. I just kept thinking about Ruth Myers driving that road every September. And him being right here the whole time. Carl Eugene Stidham was formally charged with the 1980 murder of Deborah Lynn Myers. He entered a guilty plea in January of 2020, 2 years after his arrest. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently held at the Kentucky State Reformatory in LaGrange, Kentucky. He made no statement at sentencing. Ruth Myers was 88 years old when Carl Eugene Stidham pleaded guilty in a Harlan County courtroom. She was there. Carol was there. Carol's daughter Deborah, named for the sister she never met, was there, 22 years old, a nursing student at Eastern Kentucky University, enrolled in the same program her aunt had the application for in 1980. Carol read a statement. She did not speak about Stidham. She spoke about her sister. She talked about Deborah's laugh, that wide, startled, surprised by joy sound. She talked about the casseroles, the cat named Buttons, the garden on Clover Fork Road. She said that Deborah had wanted to take care of people who couldn't take care of themselves, and that she had done it every day of the 23 years she was given. She said, "My sister deserved a long life. She deserved to fill out that application and become a nurse and take care of children and have children of her own and drive that road home 10,000 more times. She deserved all of it. And we are glad, we are grateful that the truth finally found its way to her." Ruth Myers passed away in the spring of 2022 at the age of 90. Her obituary in the Harlan Daily Enterprise noted that she was survived by her daughter Carol and her granddaughter Deborah, and that she had spent 42 years asking a question that was finally answered, and that she had the chance to hear the answer before she left. The reward poster in the window of the Harlan Food King was still there when the arrest was announced. The manager, by then nearly 60 himself, took it down that afternoon. He said he kept it in a drawer now. That seemed right. There is something particular about a case that stays cold for 42 years. Long enough for the world to genuinely forget, for the road to change, for the people who search to grow old and retire and die. Long enough for the killer to become ordinary again, to become a neighbor, to become unremarkable. But the evidence did not forget. The partial print lifted from that door panel in 1980 waded through decades of wrong technology and closed files and faded posters and anniversary calls that went nowhere, and it waited until the world finally built the instrument that could read what it had been trying to say all along. That's what justice looks like when it is slow, not absent, not lost, just waiting for the right tool to carry it home. As we close on the case of Deborah Lynn Myers, a few questions worth thinking about. When you consider that Carl Eugene Stidham attended the same church as the Myers family for 14 years, sitting in those same pews while Ruth Myers grieved, what does that tell us about the way ordinary community life can shelter someone who has done the unthinkable? And how do you feel about a justice system where a partial fingerprint lifted in 1980 could sit untouched for 37 years before anyone thought to run it through a genealogy database that existed right there, available, with the answer already inside it? Finally, for all the families like the Myerses, still waiting, still driving those roads every September, what do we owe them, beyond the right technology and someone willing to pick up the file? Justice found Deborah Lynn Myers after 42 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.